The second primary debate for 2020 Democrats will take place later this month in Detroit, and some candidates are still looking to secure their spots on the stage. Colorado Senator Michael Bennet is one of those candidates looking to meet the qualifications and build on his performance in last month's debate. Bennet received a surprising endorsement this week from conservative commentator George Will. Will says if Democrats want to beat President Trump, they should nominate Bennet. Anne-Marie Green spoke to Bennet about that earlier on CBSN AM.
I think the point that he's making in there is that it's important that Democrats not disqualify ourselves running against Donald Trump or make it easy for him to disqualify us. And I believe that from the beginning. We lost to the guy once. We can't lose to him again.
In fact, part of what George Will says is you don't have, quote, sort of problematic stances, right, in terms of eliminating health care. In fact, I think that you said Medicare for all was a bad opening argument. You voted in favor of giving President Trump money for the wall in exchange for a pathway to citizenship. These positions, I don't think you would define as particularly risky, certainly not left-leaning. Are you concerned that it's going to be difficult for you to stand out in this large crowd if you don't have kind of a policy that's going to kind of blow everything up?
Well, I'm not sure we need a policy that's going to blow everything up. Donald Trump,
or that's going to make you stand
Trump
out.
is blowing everything up. Right. And I think that my American Family Act, which would reduce childhood poverty by 40% in this country, is the biggest anti-poverty policy that we've seen since Medicaid. So I hope people will take a look at what I'm actually proposing. I do think it's critically important for us on health care, for example. There are millions of people in America that don't have access to health care. We need universal health care in this country. And I think building on the Affordable Care Act rather than repealing it, which is what Bernie Sanders is suggesting, with a true public option, Medicare X, makes a lot more sense than trying to take away 180 million people's health insurance before we actually have universal coverage. Every single person working in this newsroom would have to lose their health insurance under that plan from the Democrats. That doesn't make any sense. So I'm not sure it's bold or not bold. All I'm trying to do is meet what I call the kitchen table test in Colorado, which is states it's third Democratic, a third Republican, and a third Independent. Will this hold up under the lights of the American people looking at it? Will be something they'll want to do. And when I'm in New Hampshire and Iowa and South Carolina, what I'm hearing people say is, we want universal health care coverage. We don't want a plan that takes away everybody's insurance.
Let's talk a little bit about immigration. We've been talking a lot about that. Do you believe that we should return to the decriminalization of people crossing the border illegally or being undocumented?
I believe we should handle it the way the Obama administration handled it, which was not to separate parents and their kids at the border. I think it's very important for us
because it was not criminalized.
Because it was, no, it was, but they made a very big effort to keep families together, and that's the point. That's the distinction. I think that we should not be saying that there's no criminal liability for coming across the border illegally. I think that we should not use that for everyday offenses, but we shouldn't get rid of those criminal liabilities because every country in the world has a secure border. We need to have a secure border too. Donald Trump is already saying that the Democrats are for open borders. That's a lie. I wrote in 2013 the comprehensive immigration bill called the Gang of Eight bill. I was one of 8 senators that wrote that bill, and it had a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million people that are here that are undocumented. It had the most progressive DREAM Act that had ever been passed in American history. We solved the issues around agricultural workers, and it had $46 billion of border security in it. The difference between what we did and what Trump is talking about is we didn't have his ineffective wall. We had 21st century border security that could actually see every single inch of the border so we could understand what was going on there. And I think the American people have a reasonable expectation that we're going to have border security and also a pathway to citizenship for the people here that are undocumented. Trump doesn't believe in any of that stuff. He's fighting for his wall. He's talking about rounding up families like the ones that used to be in my old school district in Denver, and he's separating kids from their parents at the border, turning our border into a symbol of anti-immigrant hatred all around the world. That is a disaster for our country, and that's one of the reasons he needs to go. I think he's so weak on immigration. It's pitiful.
And what is your take on the planned raids this weekend?
It's awful. It's not. What we should be doing is focusing ourselves on people that have committed dangerous felonies or that we're worried about for some other reason who shouldn't be here. What we're going to see from these raids is more families split up, more children separated from their parents, and that's why the officials at these agencies have actually tried to push back on the president because they're worried they're going to have even more of a disaster on their hands after this is over.
So the censorship. Now I'm getting tongue-tied on the
early in the morning.
The citizenship question on the census. I combined two words. The president says he's going to find out this information another way. What did you think the purpose of that question was?
I think the purpose of that question was to terrify people from opening their doors to answer the census questions. We've never asked a question like that before. The census is not about, figuring out who's a citizen and who's not. It's about figuring out who's living here in America. And after all of it, finally, Donald Trump has backed off on including a question in the census, just like he backed off 35 days into a government shutdown that he caused and in the end got nothing for. So we've seen this movie before with the president. And I think we need a president who actually thinks his job is to unite, or her job is to unite the American people, not to get up every single morning to figure out how he's going to divide the American people one more time, which is what Donald Trump seems to do every day of his presidency.
There are still a lot of candidates in this race, right? How does the Democratic Party sort of come out of this without doing damage to potential leaders?
I think it's critically important for us.
Because what we've seen, particularly with the debate, is we've seen candidates target other candidates, and you sort of came out, and it appeared as if sort of you were taking aim at Bernie Sanders, but we've seen obviously Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. We've seen that shaking out.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't taking aim at Bernie. I was taking aim at his policy proposal on Medicare for all. But and I think we are going to have a competition of ideas in this campaign. America doesn't know what the National Democratic Party stands for right now. I think that's why we have so many candidates to begin with. But we do need to do it in a way that doesn't make us vulnerable to losing to Donald Trump. The most important objective that we have is beating Donald Trump. We have to figure out how to do that. And I think we need to nominate somebody who's going to unify the country around a set of ideas that's broadly popular in the middle of our country, not just on the coast, but in states like Colorado and Iowa and other states that we sometimes ignore to our peril. And that's what this early debate is about in our party right now.
Who do you think the Democratic voter is? Some have suggested that the Democratic Party has moved left.
Yeah.
Do you think it has and is moving left? And is it moving to meet the voter? Or do you think something else is happening?
I think that the base of the Democratic Party deeply wants to make sure Donald Trump is a one-term president. I think that's their number one priority. And second, I'd say no, I don't think they've moved far left. I think that there's a kind of a base that's on social media that's different than the people that I'm meeting in their living rooms in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina who want universal health care coverage. That's what they want. But they don't want to take it away from 180 million people to get there. They want a plan on climate that is actually something that is both urgent but also will endure over a generation. And they want an economy that works better for everybody. That's what we want as Democrats. The day-to-day stuff on the social media, whatever it is, one day it changes, the next day it changes, the day after that. Most of the base of the Democratic Party doesn't have time to follow that stuff because they're trying to raise their families and build a business and do something useful for their communities. And I think those people deserve representation in our party.
We sort of watched the back and forth between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and brought that up. Race is playing a more and more significant role in this election. Serious conversations about reparations are now being floated. What's your take on reparations?
Well, I've said I support the House bill on reparations because I don't think we've ever come face to face with this part of our history. I just spent 4 days in the Mississippi Delta meeting mostly with African American people to hear what their concerns are about their schools, their businesses, communities that have become completely invisible to Washington, D.C. I mean, from my vantage point, the other night during the debate, I thought it was an interesting back and forth between Kamala and the vice president. But what I kept thinking about, having been a school superintendent of a big urban district, over $1 billion and 95,000 kids, is that we have the worst income inequality that we have had in a century right now. The wealth gap between African American families and white families is bigger today than we went into the recession. Same with Latino families. And we have a system of education in this country that's actually reinforcing the income inequality that we have, not liberating people from it. Not 50 years ago, but today. And I think that's what we should be having our debate about, is what we're going to do about that. Because the biggest change we could make for our economy, the biggest change we could make for Americans that have been left behind for generations, is to have an education system that doesn't depend on the zip code that you're born into, or the money that your parents make, or whether they can afford to live in $1 million house so you can actually go to a decent school. That's where we are in America today, and that needs to change.
Robert Mueller is going to be testifying in front of Congress. You have said that you're one of the Democrats that's not calling for the impeachment of the president. Do you think after you hear from Robert Mueller, you could change your mind?
Well, I've said that I think the president committed impeachable offenses. That's what I've said from the beginning of reading the Mueller report and seeing in the second half what he has to say about obstruction of justice. My point is, we need a set of hearings, starting with Mueller testifying, so I'm so glad that he is, so that the American people, just like when we were doing Watergate, have the chance to understand what's at stake here, what the president actually did. A lot of people haven't read the Mueller report, and I hope what the politicians will do is give Bob Mueller the chance to really answer these questions in as full a way as possible, so we can understand what's really going on.
Yeah, sometimes there can be an awful lot of showboating at these hearings.
This is not one of those times.
Listen, in order for everyone to hear what you're saying right now, you got to make it to that debate stage. How are you going to do that for the next debate?
I think we're gonna make it to the next debate. We had another poll yesterday that had me, qualifying for that. So I think we're going to get there, and it's just one foot in front of the other. Okay. Maybe you'll let me come back 70 days from now, and we'll see where we are.
Oh, you're always welcome.
All right.
Michael Bennet, thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.